However, because they're blockading it constantly at sea and they don't go on land, they are just staying on the ships. So the Athenians themselves are also running out of food. They're running out of both food and, most importantly, fresh water. Because obviously you can't drink seawater. Yeah, don't drink seawater. Very inadvisable. So what?
At least they know
So
seagulls.
yeah. So if you're trapped on your trireme, having to sort of stay on it because of the needs of the campaign and sort of the commands of the general, you are absolutely suffering. Your provisions are basically everything you've kept on the trireme, which, by the way, you're going to have to ration, and it's usually going to be some barley, grain, olive oil, things that are compact and you can keep on a ship. You're also crowded with about 200 other blokes. You don't have much space to yourself. A trireme, by the way, is not a submarine. There are actually this. You are also exposed to the sun. Not only are you basically in this wooden tube, you are also sort of having all this exposure to the elements. And if you want an alternative to olive oil and barley and whatever dried cured meats that you have kept on the trireme, your only other options are to fish and to sort of crab and eat crab from the sea. And it's okay having fish and crab and lobsters or not for maybe one meal out of a series of meals. However, if you're relying on them as your primary food source for several days on end, it's not great. Plus, triremes also don't have working toilets, so I mean the sea's out there, but obviously it's not very pleasant.
Well, considering even if you could consider the ships of the line of the Royal Navy in the 1800s weren't that better off. Yeah, I don't even want to imagine like,
Yeah,
the quadriremes and such.
the Ionians, and there is a rationale behind keeping the Ionians at sea because the Persians will have their ships. They'll come out. At least some of them will come out just in case the Greeks make an attack, and then they'll come back beach on the shore where they have all their provisions and they're able to resupply. However, rotational problems do occur where a Persian commander will maybe leave, go back to shore, perhaps a bit earlier than intended, and all kinds of opportunities can arise, especially with ancient naval warfare. So if the Ionian ships are already at sea and already ready for battle, they can take advantage of any opportunities that uh, that arise if the Persians make any mistakes. And it's really important to take these opportunities because, bearing in mind, the Persians have 600 ships. They have almost double the number of ships that the Ionians have. But if they can catch them on the beach and rout them before they can take onto their ships and prepare and organize, then maybe the Ionians actually have a fighting chance. The problem is that the Ionians are now have been stuck on their ships for several days, having to do all these exercises in the baking hot sun, and they start getting fed up with Dionysius of Phocaea, and they become so fed up that Herodotus claims that they said the following: "Against what god have we sinned that we have to fulfill this task? We have lost our minds and launched out into folly, committing ourselves into the hands of this Phocaean braggart, who brings but 3 ships, and having got us, he afflicts us with afflictions incurable. Many of us have fallen sick already, and many are likely to suffer the same thing. Instead of these ills, it would be better for us to suffer anything and endure this coming slavery, whatever it will be, rather than be oppressed by that which is now upon us. Come, let us obey him no longer." So Herodotus claims that the position of Ionian sailors is in fact, I don't want to do this manual labor, and I don't want to do this manual labor so hard that I would rather be enslaved by Persia. Whether the
I
Ionians,
guess, well, I guess maybe just being on the triremes really affected that even more.
yeah, it's not impossible that Ionians will grumble and people under pressure and in hardship will do and say pretty crazy things, pretty extraordinary things. I'll rephrase that, but it does sort of contribute to this impression of the Ionians, they got routed at Ephesus. Now now they can't stand this military discipline, even if it's at this cost of their own independence. They could potentially, rather than doing manual labor, they could potentially rather be enslaved by the Persians. And so this just contributes to that sort of existing literary tradition of the Ionians as this problematic group of Greeks that drew the rest of the Greek world into this conflict, even though they didn't really have the capacity or the will to fight it out themselves for their own independence. And as a result of, but whether or not this speech actually happens, as Herodotus reports it, the Ionians return back to shore, arguably out of necessity, because you cannot stay on a trireme for several days on end without your capacity for battle being degraded quite significantly.
Or literally, like, I might also add supplies. If I'm not mistaken,
Yeah,
voyages generally were few days at the most before you had to make landfall at all costs.
yeah. You would normally have to stick close to a coastline because you can't there's not much storage space on a trireme, to be honest. I mean, you if you visit Greece, you can actually see the Greek government rebuilt a sort of working trireme that you can
Is
actually
it
row
called
in.
RMN or RMS Olympias? I think that's the name of the current warship.
Yeah. I think it's either the flagship of the official flagship of the modern Greek navy, or it's one of the sort of commissioned warships. But but people do have opportunities to go on and actually row it out into sea. There's actually a YouTube video of someone doing this. It's worth a look because it does actually show that being on a trireme is not very fun, even for a few hours, let alone several days. It's at this point that some of some of the Greek contingents start considering that maybe the Ionian cause is a lost cause. And when the Persians had brought their forces into outside of Miletus, they had also brought several of the exiled tyrants who had formerly ruled the Ionian cities that Aristagoras had ousted. And these tyrants, prior to the battle, had been sort of making approaches to these Ionian commanders and crews, saying, "Oh, if you welcome me back, if you welcome me back, the Persian king will sort of have leniency on you. If you can betray the Ionian cause, you'll be safe, you'll be fine." However, because the Ionians were resolute in deciding that they were going to fight the Persians, they had initially rebuffed the approaches of these tyrants. No more. Once all the Greek ships come back to shore and they realize that playing the long game, they also suffer just as much as the Persians, some of the Greeks end up considering defecting back to Persia, namely the Samians. And it's not a coincidence that it's Samos, because Samos is the primary rival of Miletus. The Samians and the Milesians hate each other so much that even under the Athenian Empire, they actually fight a war, even though they're both members of the Delian League.
Well, I guess some things can never change.
Indeed. And so the Samians then agree to betray the Ionians and defect over to Persia, or at least a significant number of their commanders agree to this. So when the Greeks decide to put out to sea and seek an open battle with the Persian fleet, the Samians form one of the wings, and on the other end of the battlefield are the Milesians, and the rest of the Greeks are in between. And the Samians end up, just before the battle begins, some of the Samians turn their ships around and sail home. This basically spells the doom of the
Can I
Greek
also add
fleet.
that this is like 1/6 of the Allied fleet because according to
Yeah,
Herodotus, they sent 60 ships on almost 360, so that's almost 16% of the entire force. Just like all right, guys, I'll take my leave. Good luck.
They all, a lot of them sail home. However, Herodotus does make a note of the fact that some of the Samian captains actually remain loyal to the Ionian cause and stand and fight. And he also makes mention, he loves doing this, where he'll talk about some artifact or some monument in a Greek city that he's personally seen that's still standing to his day.